Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. It has been a while since we've had a last one. I've missed you. I hope you missed us too. Tonight, we are here with two wonderful sci-fi and fantasy authors. Of course, I am talking about Jeremy Szal and Richard Swan. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, Nick. How are you?
Good. How about yourselves?
I'm very well.
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Of course. And everyone, I remarked when I saw them appeared on the screen in the green room that there's some sunlight in the background. How is that? Oh, that's right. You're not in the States like me.
Lunchtime.
Yeah.
What is the temperature like there anyway? I didn't ask that.
I'm wearing a hoodie, so that's throwing everybody off. But actually, it is pretty warm. It must be about 22, 23 degrees.
Yeah. It's beach weather today.
Yeah.
We're very spoiled as Californians because once it hits like 76, it's I'm cold.
It does tend to throw your frame of reference off, doesn't it? Because obviously I'm from London, and so 16, 17 degrees is like t-shirt and shorts. Now I'm wearing a hoodie and 7 or 8 degrees warmer than that.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, today we are here to celebrate Jeremy's latest novel, BLINDSPACE. I have a copy right here. Jeremy has written Stormblood, of course, his latest novel, BLINDSPACE. There we go. And the upcoming Wolfskin in this trilogy, which we were very fortunate to have him before for Stormblood. For those of you who don't know, he has also written over 50 science fiction short stories translated into 6 languages, and he was the editor of the Hugo Award-winning Starship Sofa until 2020 and has a BA in Film Studies and Creative Writing from UNSW. In conversation, we have the wonderful Richard Swan, the author of The Justice of Kings. Yeah.
I've got one too.
Richard is the author of the Sunday Times bestselling The Justice of Kings, the first book in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy from Orbit Books. He was born in North Yorkshire End, and thanks to a childhood spent on RFA bases and Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, now has an unhealthy interest in fighter jets. I wouldn't get near them myself, so I guess that's unhealthy. For everyone who hasn't yet purchased your own copies of either these books or any of these authors' other books, you can go ahead and hit the link below. That'll take you to our website where you can purchase them. We do ship across the country and outside of the country, except for some weird shipping states and stuff. Anyway, and if you get and make sure if you have any questions, you submit those under the Ask a Question button below, and I'll pop in about halfway through the event to ask those audience questions. It looks like we already have one submitted, so I can't wait to see what everyone is asking. I'm going to go ahead and disappear for now and leave it to Jeremy and Richard to take it away. I'll see you all in a bit.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Mike. Mike.
Jeremy.
So,
let's begin. Let's begin with the interrogation. Are you ready?
You sound so scary in a British accent.
Good. Question the first. So obviously you wrote Stormblood, and that came out
I believe
a
I did,
while ago. Yeah. It was 18 months or so that hit the shelves.
Yeah, almost 2 years actually, more than 2 years. Wow, I'm gonna just time twice, man. Yeah, 2.5 years ago.
We're up to two Storm, Two Blood, which is of course titled BLINDSPACE.
Yes.
The sequel,
Stormbloodiest.
No, that's the third one. So it's Stormblood, Two Storm, Two Blood, and then actually it would be Stormblood Tokyo Drift, wouldn't it?
It would be Stormblood, Stormbloodier, and Stormbloodiest.
That's right.
And then book 4, there will be Stormblood.
Or you could, well, I know this is a bit of tangential, but you could do like Stormblood, Typhoon Blood, Hurricane Blood. God. That's another.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think we got it, Richard.
Let's get on with it. So you wrote Stormblood. Second book is now out, BLINDSPACE. Normally, first books tend to be a little more self-contained in trilogies. Tell us what we can expect in terms of scope from the second book. Does it follow straight on? Is it a time jump? What's going on?
Yes and no. It is a time jump, but only in the sense that it's like, I think, 6 months to a year since the end of book 1. It still follows the same character, Fukasawa. It's still the first-person protagonist, and it's told entirely from his point of view, and it, carries the storyline forward. I think that I wrapped up the end of book 1 in a way that it had standalone potential, but there was a
Yes.
lot more story to be told. And I think that that's a way that a lot of writers are told that we should do our first books.
Yeah.
And so it does not, it wraps up part of the story in a loose bow, but the bad guys are still out there. And so there's a lot more storytelling to do and a lot more adventures to be had and a lot more bad guys to take down and a lot more gnarly action. Yeah, pretty much. And so, yeah, like the story isn't done at all. But it is a continuity. Absolutely. Like this isn't just like the bad guy of the week here. Like it is does follow the same narrative structures and patterns.
Yeah, that's right. I think, if my own trilogy follows the same kind of pattern, the first book is self-contained investigation, but you leave the threads open for the kind of overarching plot, which you then kind of, so as we were sort of talking about last night, as we were having a couple of beers, we were saying, a lot of these books, the first one is a bit more standalone, and then the second two tend to form two halves of a broader story. And is that the case with Stormblood and BLINDSPACE and Wolfskin? Is that one larger arc?
Yeah, definitely. I've never actually said this publicly, but the ending for book 2 is actually going to be the start of book 3 because we couldn't fit it all in. We got to a certain point where the book ended. Like my editor was saying, okay, this would be an excellent place to end it. And I was saying, I'm not sure I really want to end it here. And she was saying that the next part of the book, what happens next is so big and so important that it needs the time to breathe and stand alone. And so I took a step back and looked at it, and I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. It really does. Fortunately, where it ends, where the book 2 did end up ending, works wonderfully. And I think it's brilliantly. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they threw the book across the room but then they went and picked it up, not because they were, hated it, but because they were like taken aback by what had happened. It's a bit of a knife in the gut. Like you're like, everything looks like it's gonna happen, but then no, it's not what you think. But without spoiling it, I think it's earned, and I think that it definitely serves a purpose, and there's a reason why it had to happen, and that will become very, very clear when people get their hands on book 3 and you see, it needed to happen this way for the story to unfold. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Is two halves of a whole.
Yeah, I guess a lot of the time, if people have bought into the trilogy and they're kind of they'll either read the first one or they'll read the whole lot, so you have a bit more leeway with the endings of the second book, don't you? It doesn't have to be quite as rounded off because most people will read both of them, so you've got that wiggle room with the ending. You can leave it a bit more cliffhangery. So obviously the first one, as we've briefly alluded to already, was focused around an investigation into people shooting up Stormblood when they probably shouldn't have been, and we had kind of flashbacks to Bakov's life in the army and the kind of the horrors of that war, which is all very well done. The second book, then, we're thinking of more battles, more fighting, more space. Kind of what's the action shaping up to look like?
I think the action in Stormblood, it was very loose. I didn't really think about it too much. I was thinking, okay, he's confronted with bad guys and he's got to shoot his way out. Well, I guess this is where the big narrative moment's happening. But in BLINDSPACE, I really thought long and hard about the big set pieces, the big moments. Okay, this is when the battle breaks out. This is what is lost afterwards. These are the consequences of this battle. This is what led up to it. And these are the consequences that are going to continue on later down the line. We can't just shoot our way out and not have repercussions. And so, I did think long and hard about that and where I placed. And the battles are definitely a lot more space opera-esque. Like there's one sequence that is one of the best sequence I've ever written, I think, where it takes place on a moon and in unfamiliar gravity, and they have to escape these augmented people that are chasing them, and they have to start utilize I won't spoil it, but it does use zero gravity and spaceships and jump sequences and orbital jumps and all that wonderful stuff. Cool. And it almost wrote itself. Like I remember sitting in a cafe and just patting it out. I'm like, I know exactly what's happening. I know exactly what's going to happen here. And it just rolled out, and it was high octane and ferocious and grisly, but also very Star Wars-esque in terms of the
Well,
whole
kind of be my
scope
next
of it.
question in some ways, because I was going to ask you, when you're writing a space battle, I don't know if you, I presume you've seen the Revenge of the Sith, episode 3 of the Star Wars prequels. You know, it's
Yeah, I have
a
seen
small kind of art house cinema. You probably won't have heard of it, but
Yeah.
anyway, it's this film about space battles. But in the opening sequence of Revenge of the Sith, there's obviously like a very almost World War One-esque naval engagement, or maybe or probably more even like 19th century, you know, broadsides, you know, big turbo laser broadsides and stuff's exploding, and it's all very visually spectacular, but it's, you know, realistic. It's nothing like it would be in real life.
Yes.
When you approach your space battles, is there a kind of, oh, you know what, I don't care, I just want the laser broadside, or are you thinking more in terms of like, you know, vacuum and gravity and distances and like, or is there some happy medium which you think you've reached?
I'm pleased to say I don't give a damn about realism.
Okay.
I just fun stuff. It's never, for me, it's never about the realistic science. It comes down to two things. It comes down to tone. Well, no, three things. You know, tone, you know, character, and the exuberance, like the fun of it. You know, what's you have to like the absurdity when it comes to battles, like the ferociousness, the extremity of it.
Yeah.
And you know, I really don't care about the science of it. Like these will literally have alien dreadnoughts and flagships shooting, you know, tungsten rods and laser beams and plasma cannons at each other, and you know, just annihilating and raising these gunships that are doing barrel curves and swerves in asteroid belts. Like I'm really not interested in the scientific reasoning behind it. What I am interested in is what it feels like to be in that cockpit, what it feels like on a gut, the visceralness of it, the way that, you know, stomach flips, the way that your sweat will sometimes start, you know, bleeding, going into your eyes, and you can't wipe it away because your hands are like almost fused to the control prism. You know, and especially as the main character who has alien drugs in him, and he, you know, literally gets high off this sort of stuff. And so my focus is always redirected to what's going on in his head, what's going on in his body. So, and there's a sequence at the end of Blind Space where there's a big chaotic space battle that was actually a bit inspired by sort of battles that you would see in movies like Revenge of the Sith. And or, you know, and I really didn't take time to explain any of it, or, you know, in the terms of the science of it. You know, we know why the characters are there, obviously, but the whole, you know, battle, the actual fight itself, and how it all works, I'm not explaining it. You know, we have all the characters like umbilicaled in these sort of wombs where they can, and they're mind linked to the ships, so it feels like they're actually standing in the cockpit, standing on the bridge, even though they're just deep in the ship's bowels, but they're also, you know, shooting turrets and machine guns as the ships fly in, and they see the other ships, you know, flanking them and defending them, and it's all wonderful and weird and bizarre.
That's great. You've taken a more kind of Mass Effect kind of approach, where they've basically taken modern day weapons and tactics and just sort of jazz them up cosmetically. And you're damn, because obviously in real life it'd all be robots, wouldn't it? You know, there would be humans within a million miles of the space level. So it's good that you've taken that approach, I think. And also, I guess people are pretty genre savvy, aren't they, these days? They don't need you to handhold them through the physics or whatever. It gets a bit dry off for a while, doesn't it?
Really, I mean, I don't really need to, you know, say, you know, I squeezed off a shot from the plasma cannon. The plasma cannon was a superheated engine that charged up. No one cares. No one cares. No one's reading that. And I'd like to think
people
that,
know what you're talking about, don't they?
I know what I mean. Yeah, and I'd rather trust the reader to be there. I want them to be there. I don't want them to be studied.
So you mentioned just now that there was, you know, alien dreadnoughts and, you know, alien soldiers and commandos and whatever. When I know there was, you know, we allude to a few alien characters in Stormblood, but they don't form an integral part of the storyline. Do the aliens in the second book, you know, do you bring them in from the background and kind of round them out? And if you do, Like, how do you go about that? How do you about making an alien interesting?
Yeah, to answer your first question, yeah, I absolutely do bring a lot more of the aliens into the foreground. The two of the main characters are aliens. One of them is Juvens, who you would have met in Stormblood, the big kaiju general with the horns. And the second is Quillen, who is a Torvin, another alien species who is an explosive expert, but also has anxiety and is very finicky and fussy. And so it kind of plays into. I like the contradictory nature of that. Someone who has explosives also suffers from anxiety and
a phobia of explosives.
Phobia. Not even that, but other things.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think the best way to do it, to tell those sorts of stories with those sorts of characters, is to make them interesting from a quote unquote human point of view. You see the person they are, not what their species are, what their kind does, not what people from their planet do. Like, what do they do? What is something that they're able to, what's their behavior, and in the individual sense, like it's a little weird. I mean, like, we have species variations within animals. Like, wouldn't say, oh, all dogs are, aggressive, all dogs are, quiet and playful. Well, you wouldn't. Why would you expect a sentient species to be the same, right? Why would you completely? Yeah, exactly. And there's a point actually where a bit in the first part of the book where Quillen, he's drinking. They're all sitting in a bar, and he drinks beer, and he spits it out and starts retching. And he says, "I can't drink that. It's human beer. I can't do it. Like, my species can't handle it." And then one of the other characters says, ask one of the alien bartenders, when you alien speak, and the Quillen looks at him like, "Alien speak? Are you serious?" And he's like, "Well, don't you guys all come from the same planet, don't you?" And his response is, "So do you speak Korean, Portuguese, Swahili?"
Cool. That's a nice touch. Yeah.
And so that was my way of saying, this is no species is a monolith.
No, of course.
In the same way, Juvens, the other alien character, is very blunt and doesn't care about politics and just wants to cut to the heart of the matter, get the stuff done, kill the bastards, and do what needs to be doing. But he comes from a species that is very used to being the top dog in the galactic politicking, is very used to maneuvering their way through the galactic community and overseeing how things are going in the big overarching politics and maneuvering things with the relationship and species. And so there was a dichotomy there as well. And so it's important to always have the individual there. And some of the most fun I've had with writing book 2 was writing the conversations between Quillen and Juvens as two main alien characters. Completely different in every respects, but they still have some sort of do have an interesting relationship, and they still have a respect for each other, even though one of them would never think of admitting it to the other. But I think of being able to just throw them on the page and seeing what they would say, not what's something that someone from this culture would say. If you would do that from you're a human character, you'd be writing lazy stereotypes that would be racist at worst. And so I try to take the same humane, individual, empathetic approach to writing alien characters. And so
when you
I was going to say I work in little touches. For example, Juvens has horns, obviously, and horns. It's hinted at in the first book that it's an object of pride for the males, and like touching their horns is like the absolute worst way to offend a kaiji. And it's never touched on again. But in the second book, a cultist grabs Juvens' horns, and you can see for a moment this absolute rage flares in his eyes, and he just bends his head and gores the cultist through the chest like an absolute rage, and just flicks him off like a rag doll. Like, no one touches my horns. But that's the end of it. Like, I'm not going to go into this whole page-long monologue about why it's important to the tribe and how it's important, how we evolved. You don't need to know that. You just need to know.
The line does quite a lot of heavy lifting by itself, doesn't it? The reader can appreciate that it's obviously a cultural sensitivity to that alien race, without you having to be like, In fact, this dates back to the 10th century when touching horns became a. Are your aliens, when you write aliens, are they kind of like humans with makeup on, like in Star Trek, or do you go totally wacky? This is a sentient plant, or is there, because a lot of aliens, especially we see on TV and movies, that they're bipedal, they're kind of human shaped, they talk English, so they have the vocal cords to be able to do that. But I've, some fiction I've read, especially like Ian Banks, he seems to delight in making aliens just utterly alien, clouds of sentient gas or whatever. What's your kind of approach? And you obviously take a little bit more of a pulpy approach when it comes to your space action. Do you take the same approach to aliens as well?
Yes and no. I think that like a lot of them are bipedal and are able to speak, but of course there are aliens on the page that don't speak. I mean, there are these giant whale-like aquatic creatures that are fused to the engines of cruise liners, because that's what they do. They like piloting ships, and they get lonely and die if they're taken from the machine. So that's what they live to do. They love it. Yeah. And really cool. But they never really speak, and they're never mentioned again. But it's just a little tidbit. But the characters, the aliens that are more predominant, the ones that are more recognizable and more relevant to the world and the plot and the story, definitely probably lean a little bit more towards the human-esque, because they have to. It's a little bit hard to communicate with, do galactic politics with this underwater species that communicates in sonar.
It's not as satisfying, is it?
Not quite as satisfying. There's less room for fun personalities and less room for interesting dialogue. I mean, I would love to do what Ian and Banks does, but I think, again, I'm trying to veer more towards the character side of things, and to have an alien that was a bit more interesting, a bit more someone that you could quote unquote relate to as a human-esque character. I think that's
you had at least an analog of human emotion that you could identify with, rather than, oh, that's my splunk emotion. You would understand. So you obviously have the alien characters who are being sort of fleshed out, and obviously we have human characters as well. And it was a relatively, condensed cast in the first book. I think there were sort of 2 or 3, weren't there? There was Grimm, his sidekick, and then there was that woman name I can't remember. What's the kind of the cast of characters looking like in books 2 and 3? Do we still have those human relationships being developed?
Oh, absolutely. That's the entire central beating heart of the book. I mean, although especially more so in books 2 and 3, although I'm writing about aliens and spaceships and what have you, these books, the Common Trilogy, it is a human drama story. It is about relationships. It's about, characters and how they evolve and how they think of each other, and how that reflects what they do and what they say and the decisions they make and the sides that they align with, and the moves that they make and how that affects the plot overall. I'm not really interested in just writing a story where the humans are just pawns on a chessboard. Like, no, these are the guys moving the chessboard around. They're the ones making the decisions. They're the ones actively making these things happen. And and that's always the most important thing to me, and especially the character relationships. So you have, in the first book, Barkov's relationship with his estranged brother, and things change in book 2, and so they have a much better footing, and things change even further in book 3 for reasons that I can't say because of spoilers. But you will continue to see that unfurling and unfolding throughout book 3 as well. You'll be able to see, okay, you've made this decision together, or this event has happened. They've clashed on it. They've disagreed about it. How does it affect the team's, dichotomy now? How does it affect everything else? I mean, I think that's the most interesting thing about narrative storytelling, and regardless of genre, is the relationships between characters and how it affects them on a personal level, not just a plot-wise level. How do they feel about other people? How do they feel about the way they've been treated, or when they see something else happening? I mean, we all have that thing that there's someone that we want desperately to like, or that someone that we feel understands us. And then there are moments where there are people that we just don't like, but we have to, for whatever reason, associate with them one way or another, like me and you, Richard.
That's right.
Stuff like yeah,
I'm going to start hardballing these questions in a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's the most interesting thing about narrative storytelling.
I completely agree. I think, and I take the same approach to my own writing, which is you've got to focus on. I like to call it soap opera, which is where the phrase space opera came from. It was originally like derogatory because it was like, oh, this silly. It's silly. But actually, it fits perfectly. I think, Peter Hamilton, who's one of my favorite science fiction authors, I think he does this very well. He focuses on the human drama and their family dynamics and their friends and the sex, and it makes it all so much more interesting because that's what we relate to as readers and human beings. Well, and I know that you're not quite human, Jeremy, but even you can relate to human drama. You know about it. So that was one of the things I thought was handled very nicely in the first one. Was it definitely had this thread of, well, it's fraternal drama was the core of it, wasn't it? It was Vakov and his brother, and that's what I'm reading Tim Napper's book, as you know, 36 Streets at the moment, and that has the same sibling dynamic as well, and it makes for fascinating reading. So I think we've got one last question before we do the audience questions, because I see they're stacking up. I know one of the things that you really lean into in these series is the kind of the moral ambiguity of Vakov and his actions. How do you go about tackling something like that, themes like that in your books? It's obviously very important to you in your writing. What made you decide to make the action a bit grayer in terms of the moral spectrum?
Because it's much more interesting. I've got zero. I was saying to you last night, I've got zero interest in writing a Luke Skywalker-esque character who always has to do the right thing and always must save the bad guy, even if the bad guy is a complete bastard and has murdered millions of people. He can still be redeemed if I just show him the way. And I've got to save.
Just kill him.
Yeah, even if the villain often has sometimes as a point. We have to burn the city down. Oh no, I've got to save it because of whatever reason. I have to save the bad guy from himself, and I'm not really interested in that because I find that it's not realistic, and I know that it's a bit of a weird thing to be talking about when we're talking about spaceships and aliens. But I think realism within characters, in human emotion, you can't cheat on that. You have to be honest, and all of us are morally gray because we always make decisions that are not sometimes for the best. We do things for selfish reasons. We do things for reasons we do things that we regret. We do things that we say we regret, but we don't really. There are things that we think, then there are things that we say. There are moments that we sometimes have to look at, our own personal choices, and we say, I really shouldn't have done that, or I feel really guilty about it, and we have to live with it. And I think that's the sort of stuff that I'm much more interested in exploring in these books. Is that there's no real answer to some of them. There's no clean one single stroke solution. And early on, not early on, but in the middle of this book, Vakov has something done to him that's very brutal, and he is in a arena-like area, and he faces a bad guy, and he kills him in front of about 1,000 people, and he could have stopped him. He could have let him go if he wanted, but he didn't want to because because we've been made to hate him over what he has done to both Vakov and his friends and other people. And I thought, could he walk away? And the answer, there was no way in hell would he or could he ever walk away from this, knowing him. And I think it's a more interesting choice. So he gets a canister of Storm Tech and basically crushes the guy's skull with it. Afterwards, someone, said, because this is one of the central narratives of Stormblood and the series is, the root of violence and aggression and what makes you aggressive. Is it really the Storm Tech, or is it something in you that is
being
really
amplified by the Storm Tech?
Is it you have a darkness in you? Is this something that you really want to do? And Stormblood is really giving you the excuse to go wild, basically go feral. And Vakov at some point is talking to someone who's displeased by his actions. And I just realized, I could have him say sorry that I did this, but he's not sorry. He doesn't want to be sorry. The man had it coming. The man needed to die. It wasn't the morally right thing to do. Probably not if you're talking about completely objectively, according to some at least. But that's the action he made. This is a decision he made, and got to live with it. He doesn't care. He's glad that the guy's gone, wiped from the face of the earth or the asteroid in this context.
Yeah.
That's what matters, and it's much more interesting to grapple with that, to deal with it, to see what goes on inside his head. And if I was immediately right, as I thought I would, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. It would have felt cheap. I think it would have cheated. It would have been a disservice to both his character and to the larger narrative themes at play. And it's much more interesting to deal with those consequences and to throw some more mud and dirt and moral ambiguity into play, because I think that's just a lot more fun as well.
Of course. Yeah. Shall we? Do you want to open it up to some audience questions, Nick, and see what we've got? I see there's 5 there waiting.
If Absolutely. I may, very, very quickly before we do that, I just
go on.
2-minute comment is that when I'm doing these books and I'm writing this stuff, I'm always trying to push myself a little bit more out than I sometimes feel comfortable doing. So in this book 3, I'm trying to see how much can I get away with, how much moral grayness and bad behavior can I get away with and still not betray the character, not betray the themes, and still have him be someone that is empathetic and likable and a protagonist that you root for. And I'm trying to find that balance, and it's not always easy, but that's the most interesting thing. I think what interesting thing about these stories is that you can experiment and can try and see, okay, maybe that wasn't the right decision, but I was with you when he did it, man. And the audience, well, they're going to have to come along with it, and the audience does come along with it. And I find that incredibly rewarding.
Very cool.
I thought you were taking us, Jeremy, to saying, I'm seeing how far I can get away with this and have my publishers not be mad. The ultimate goal of every author, I imagine. What won't they push back on?
There was 1 or 2 things that my editor pushed back on with book 2, and I think it was for the best, but I managed to find a middle ground in the end. That's it's a compromise. It's never just strict obedience. It's compromise. It's a conversation. Yeah.
Totally.
I have to get, otherwise I stay in the basement forever. Change the so,
All right, everyone out there, if you have any questions you would like to submit and ask Jeremy or Richard, you can go ahead and do so. Ask a question button. I'm going to go ahead and begin with a few that we have already. This one is coming from Patrick, and I have to say this in this voice to convey the emotions behind it. A science fiction author and a fantasy author in conversation? How did this happen? How do you two know each other?
I moved to Sydney a year or so ago, and I saw that Jeremy, we were Twitter friends, weren't we, Jeremy? And I moved from London, and I sent him a little message, and I said, hey, I see that you're a science fiction author with Gallant. I'm with Orbit. Do you want to get a drink sometime? And we did. Now we're relentless enemies.
Yeah, pretty much. We told the boring version of that story, which I was going to say that we had to fight to the death in some underground author fight club genre.
That's right.
Fight club.
But rule number 1 of that is you don't talk about it. So
yeah.
And now it's on the internet. Not getting scrubbed.
That's right.
Yeah. Because you weren't even published by then, I don't think, Richard. It was accepted, but it wasn't published. So
it was out in February this year. Yeah, February. So
I think I put you up for drinks on your launch day as well.
That's right.
The day before, yeah. So I got to know you before it was cool.
The alcohol has dulled my recollection.
So I think with a lot of authors, writing and alcohol goes hand in hand quite a bit.
Very much.
Or at least I've seen with a bunch of authors.
Yeah, that's why I became a writer, to justify my alcoholism.
Oh gosh, I like alcohol so much. I better be a writer. Thank you for that one, Patrick. This one's coming from Jackson. For both of you, what have been your proudest moments as authors, and what's gotten you through the inevitable low moments?
I hit the Sunday Times bestsellers list, which is in the UK, that's our most prestigious literary list. So, and that was on, on release. So that was very nice. And that tends to be one of the kind of lifetime goals of a lot of authors. So that was really cool. It was a little bit unexpected, but it was wonderful, and it was a surreal experience because I was just at home. I was just in the apartment with my wife, and it's like, oh great, there's no office to go to or colleagues to celebrate with, apart from Jeremy here. So I bought a bottle of champagne and got hammered. So that was
alcohol again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Pattern.
A great way of getting through the low moments. I read my reviews, but I only read the nice ones. So I'll go on Goodreads and I'll filter by the 5 stars. And if I need a little boost, I'll just read 3 or 4 of those. And actually, it's a really nice way of just kind of reigniting the spark if I'm feeling a little bit unconfident about something. So if anyone has ever written a negative review, I will not have seen it. But if you've written a nice one, I definitely will have. How about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, something similar. I'm not because I'm not a Sunday Times best-selling author yet, and so one of probably seeing my book in print for the first time, especially the Goldsboro hardback edition. It's on the other side of the room right now, but it's a very nice sprayed edge edition. Like the book 2 is purple, book 1 is gold and orange, and it looks incredibly fancy. And flicking through it and seeing that I wrote all of these words. That's everything. These are all my words. This is my heart and soul and dreams and everything I put into it. And seeing it actually out there in the world is amazing. And I've been at events where I get people coming up to me and they tell me just how much the stories that I write mean to them and how much they enjoy them and how they've connected with the main character and how they've, in some cases it's helped them cope with their own real life issues, whether it's, loss or, estrangement from family members or, the fact that they have a better relationship with their friends than they do with their blood relatives, their actual physical family, and, how much they resonated with the themes. And that is hugely gratifying, and it makes you feel incredibly proud because this is stuff I'm just making up in my room, in my free time, and being told that it means this much to people and this many people are reading with it and connecting with it. Yeah, it's incredibly gratifying. I mean, you can sell all the copies you want, but being able to touch someone intimately in that regard. Stop it, Richard. But I knew you were going to be like that.
Jeremy, stop touching people intimately. It's illegal.
No, but just being able to connect emotionally with people in that regard is quite gratifying and very, it's a massive confidence boost because I think a lot of authors, including myself, suffer from lapse in confidence when we probably shouldn't. But yeah, we often do. Low moments. Yeah, sometimes, you get hiccups in publishing all the time, especially as I think my book came out on this day that height of COVID and the day that all the race riots are happening in America. The Blackout Day, I think it was called. And that was, really difficult because you knew that, more important things are happening. But at the same time, it's my book. So that was not fun. And, occasionally you'll get a really bad review with someone who just objectively was like in bad faith, reading the worst thing that they could and, taking one little thing in your book and just blowing it up out of proportion and making you feel crap because they tagged you in it for some reason. For people do that. I think it's really
block them.
Yeah, I don't do it anymore. I don't. Yeah, it saves me from drinking
the paperback release. I know. I think the UK release of Justice of Kings came out on the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. So I do sympathize, Jeremy. It did kind of put it into perspective a little bit. I was like, come on, guys. Jesus Christ. You should wait one day.
Come on, hold off the war.
Yeah, God. Just hit the pause button on that. Until, it's been out a week. But so I know that. It feels like going on Twitter and promoting, please buy my book or whatever feels a bit insignificant when people are losing their lives, in that case. So, that was a similar kind of situation. It was a bit shit.
Yeah,
it's fair. All right, for Jeremy, you had mentioned that you're just making up stuff in your room, but what ultimately goes into research? Like, what did you do for research for BLINDSPACE?
Research is a strong word. I just probably think about the sort of themes that I'd like to tackle, the sort of narrative threads I'd like to explore and pull. I just try and amplify those and try and break those down and dissect them a little bit. The research that I did do a bit into drugs and, how it affects people emotionally and how it actually, in many ways. Yeah, not in that sense, Richard. I wouldn't know where to get them. I'm not street smart.
It's not what you said to me in the pub last night.
You weren't supposed to tell me that you were selling them to me, Richard.
Hey man, what research you get up to in the privacy of your own basement?
No, I wasn't doing it in that sense. No.
Sure.
Just, going online and seeing, reading testimonies and seeing, the different effects that it has on people and how it's, almost altered their brain in the sense that they're not the same person. And that I find incredibly fascinating. You can have something, a chemical, you can take it enough that it rewires the way that your neural patterns work and how you function physiologically. And that's terrifying. And yet people still take it willingly. And it's kind of the, thought, that this stuff is going to do this to you. And yet you still take it, you still do it. And you still, you've seen what it does to other people. And yet you continue to engage in this practice. What drives you? Like, it's against every quote unquote piece of common sense.
It's addiction, though, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, it's addiction, of course. But there's also the, it's curiosity, probably for some people. It's also,
you mean the initial taking of it? Yeah,
partially,
right, sure.
There's also addiction. There's curiosity. There's wanting to get that feeling. There's probably peer pressure. There's probably almost liking, or dislike of what you looked like or felt like beforehand. So all those things are pretty interesting to me.
Sure.
And and it's kind of fun to just throw that into a blender and with all this other sci-fi crazy alien stuff and see if it can match the emotional and make it stick emotionally.
Yeah. So you mentioned themes, and that really made me think. But for both of you, do you have themes that you like to put in your writings consistently, or themes that are just favorites of yours?
I think when I wrote The Justice of Kings, I self-published some sci-fi years ago, and it was at the height of the kind of War on Terror, and I was really getting down the rabbit. And I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator, that was my job, and I was really getting down the barrel of like jurisprudence and the theory of law and the philosophy of law. And one of the things that's always really interested me, and Jeremy touched on it when he was talking earlier before, was this idea of moral absolutism versus moral relativism. And there's this idea in sort of legal philosophy, which is what's important is it the rules in and of themselves, i.e. murder is illegal, and therefore killing in all circumstances is illegal and therefore unethical. And that would what would be called deontology, which is the rule set is the most important thing that guides what's ethically permissible, or it's consequentialism, which is when we look at the consequences of an action and to decide whether it's morally permissible or not. So killing somebody might be wrong from a rules perspective, but if you have to kill that person to save 1,000 more, then that might be ethically permissible. And this tension between these two schools of thought, it kind of ran through the sci-fi. And The Justice of Kings is basically all that. It's about a traveling lawyer, justice, magistrate with ultimate authority to kind of enforce the law. And so obviously with great power comes great responsibility. And it's a question of to what extent do you follow the laws and follow the rules, even if they lead to unjust outcomes, or do you bend the rules or break them in order to achieve more ethically, or ethical or moral outcomes? And so that theme is something I've been almost fixated on in my writing for 10 years or so now.
Jeremy?
Similar, very, very similar. Again, if you kill someone who is going to kill other people, so is that then excusable, or is murder absolutely wrong no matter the consequences, no matter the cost of it? because as well, if you know this person is going to kill other people or is going to kill these thousands or is going to do all this other damage and you do nothing, then are you blood guilty? Like, are you also culpable because you did nothing to stop it? And, and then you go and do this act, but then what does it do to you afterwards? What does it make you? Like, did you maybe enjoy it a little more than you should? Was it personally motivated? And I try to, try and grapple with these themes and have back of doing all these other things and then trying to wrestle it all in his head. And a lot of the things that he does wrestle with are things that I've wrestled with as well. If you do go and, if you ignore someone or you treat someone in a certain way and they then as a consequence become bad or go and do these other things, do you share some of that guilt if you inadvertently push them on this path? And, is it your obligation to stop them or obligation to, go and prevent them from doing these other things? And where do you draw the line? Where do you say, no, this is not my responsibility anymore. I've done all I could. Or is it your responsibility as a fellow human being to say, no, I have to try and fix this before it's too late? And when that person is family, when the person is a brother, those things become even more exacerbated and you feel a lot more strongly. And so trying to grapple with those things as well, and how, as well, when it comes to battles, and warfare, a lot of the people on the other side feel sometimes just as strongly about their cause and their rights and what they're doing as the other people do, who are the good guys, who are the protagonists. And although objectively it might not be the same, they may not have any realistic cause whatsoever because their goals are horrendous and horrific, but they believe in it in absolute regard, in absolute terms, in absolute certainty. And so then you kind of look at what point, where do I draw the line? How far am I prepared to go in order to stop them? And you kind of also realize that sometimes it's not always a matter of good and bad, because it's just a matter of where you stand. It's a matter of what you're trying to do and what the people that you're trying to save, and the cost of doing nothing, the cost of of sitting back and letting all this happen. Then are you, by extension, guilty? And it's also, I think, about the human factor. We have all these things that we know are right, that we know are wrong, but then there's this little human factor in us, this little emotional tug that says, I'm going to do something I probably shouldn't, because for whatever reason, to protect someone or to, of something worse happening, you go against your moral scruples and your moral code, and you go off and do something different. And sometimes it doesn't affect, it's for the worse. Sometimes there are consequences that are even worse in the first place. And it's about grappling with that. In fiction, you see a lot of protagonists, especially in more morally white films and books and what have you, the characters who do something bad, ultimately it's going to lead them down a dark path. They're always going to, they're going to do something bad. It's a start of a slippery slope, and they're going to become the villain. And, it's the classic Star Wars thing. Anakin went and killed all the Sand People for killing his mom. He's definitely going to become the bad guy, and I don't find that interesting, because I find it much more interesting just a character who goes and does these bad things that they probably shouldn't, and it changes them. But at the end of the day, they're able to, they get away, not consequence free, but without, dramatic consequences. They don't become the villain. They've just done this thing and it's changed them, but they continue on. They not live happily ever after, but they kind of get away with it in the end. Not everything has to come back. Not everything has to have, exactly. Not everything has to have this big overarching consequence.
Sure.
You do one thing, karma dictates it's going to come back to bite you in your moment of glory. This very mythical idea of morality. Sometimes people do bad stuff and they get away with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the good guy does it and they get away with it. And sometimes, the good guy needs to do bad things in order to stop the bad guys. So
very deep themes there. All right. So this one is coming from Patrick again. It's directed to you, Jeremy, but I think it's fair if I ask both of you, what's on the wall behind Jeremy? What's on the wall behind Richard?
It's a map of Australia in the style of Tolkien, so sort of local
Okay, I thought I saw like that art style that you would see.
Yeah.
In
It's deliberately in the
Tolkien's books.
style of the maps in the Lord of the Rings.
That is so cool.
But it's obviously Australia. It's really cool. Yeah.
That is a stag or an elk who watches over me. It's a fold down wall bed, and that is just geometrical elk that is stickered to the wall. Not quite as cool as Richard's, but
Hey, you do you.
It
You
watches
like
you without
stags.
eyes, making sure you're writing and doing.
also have a
Xenomorph elk.
Star Wars poster over there.
Oh
with another
Okay,
elk.
another
Oh my
elk,
gosh.
yeah.
Best. So yeah.
Interesting. You went sequel trilogy from the poster. The worst of the 3 trilogies. Fascinating.
Star Wars argument that can't go badly, Richard. We're on a good streak.
Right.
Let's.
You're right.
Yeah, but yeah,
We've only got
no,
9 minutes
it
left.
is the worst. It is the worst.
Let's have another question.
All right. If you were to each give a book to each other that best describes you, but not written by yourself, what would you give each other? The deep stuff.
Best describes me.
So what will we give each other?
Yeah, you would give a book to each other that would best describe yourself, but not written by you, not one of your books.
Well, that's a tough one. I can certainly tell you the book that most encapsulates the book I wish I had written, and therefore is me, my writing self, which is Use of Weapons by Ian Banks. It's a book I read when I was about, I must have been in my early teens when I read it, and then I reread it again in my early 20s. And it's an incredible story, a science fiction story about an agent, sort of secret agent, and he is used by this society for various very dangerous missions. But it's brilliant because not only is it a fantastic story, it's got 2 storylines running. One runs chronologically backwards and one runs chronologically forwards. And at the end of the story, it's obviously the beginning of the chronologically backwards timeline and the chronologically forward. And when you see what happens at the end, it completely reframes the entire story and the character himself. So what you thought about the character is completely inverted, and it's a masterpiece of fiction. Not only is it just brilliant science fiction, but as a structural device, it's brilliant. And it's, if people ask me what book would you have written if you could have written and it's that one. Like, I wish I had done it, and I never can because it exists. But that would be, I would give Jeremy, here you go, Jeremy, here's a copy of Use of Weapons by Ian Banks. This is me.
Okay, Jeremy, what would you give back to Richard? Give and take.
I would give him a copy of the Red Rising trilogy. 3 books, technically, so I'm cheating. Yeah,
that's a net gain of 2 books for me.
Yeah, my favorite books of all time. I think it changed very much the way that I wrote books and the way that I saw a character. And again, like what I was talking about before, a lot of that, moral ambiguity in characters who do bad things for good reasons, or the inverted, and how although it's a first-person book, books 2 and 3 especially are space operas, and writing a space opera, as I'm discovering myself, in first person, so it's almost like a stream of consciousness story, but still having to grapple with all these other bigger ideas and themes and set pieces and worlds and planets is fiendishly difficult. But Pierce Brown does it with a majesty and a eye to character that I really envy. And he's able to work in so much scope and so much exuberance and so much intimate character moments into just a paragraph. And you can tell that he's really slaved over it and really made it do as much heavy lifting as possible. And you believe everything you're reading, that, these are real people in real circumstances, and this is the way people would behave. And they're just damn good books. There's not a single character, even most of the bad guys, who you don't understand in a way, if not sympathize with. But you definitely can see what drew them to this moment and what made them who they are. And that's, again, fiendishly difficult to do. And yeah, they're just great books.
So yeah, the 6th one in July of next year.
Yeah, I can't wait. Book 5 was something else, I'll tell you now. But Yeah.
So you'd only give me the first 3. You wouldn't give me all 6.
I guess not.
No, go and buy them
Buy
yourself.
yourself at that point.
You got the money. You got the money.
Sunday Times best-selling author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sweet book money. As any author will tell you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm actually rolling in it.
Drowning in that, yeah. burn my money in my fireplace estate to stay warm at night.
Oh.
That's right. I sleep in a bed of sweet fantasy fiction money.
Is it better than Monopoly money?
Just about. I
Okay.
think the conversion rates just slightly favors fiction author money, but it's very variable.
Well, we have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure you both have enough time to talk about what you're working on next. What are some things exciting wise, or you want to tease toward the audience?
Ooh. Well, my second book in the trilogy comes out in February. That's called The Tyranny of Faith. And I'm very, very happy with that one. I love where that's come out. And obviously the third book comes out a year after that. I've got a few other irons in the fire at the moment, but for the purposes of this interview, I'll just focus on those. Thanks.
Fair. Jeremy.
Yeah. Yes, BLINDSPACE 2, book 2 in the Common Trilogy just came out in the US. Came out last year in the UK and Australia, but it's now out in the US as well, which is fantastic. The book 3, Wolfskin, I am currently editing / rewriting and redrafting at the moment. Yeah, I'm slowly just hacking away at it. I've got the first draft or draft 0.5 down. I'm just trying to, kind of restructure and rewrite some of the other chapters that need to be done. And then it's time for polishing. But that probably will be not out until 2024. But that is out of my control at the moment. That's the good people at the publishing sphere. I do the one thing that I'm good at, and that's the writing. So everything else is just their responsibility. I don't worry about things that I suck at. So,
well, I think
Which
it's
is everything else.
Publishing itself has been very chaotic in the last few years. Still is. So you're just running it out, right?
2 years, but who's counting, right?
Well, Richard, Jeremy, thank you so much. And I just want everyone out there who's watching now or in the future, don't forget to get your own copies of BLINDSPACE and the Justice of King. If you act as soon as you can still get some signed book plates. We should be getting those very soon. And we do ship across the United States as well as a little bit outside of the country. So we can hopefully get you your books. And awesome. I hope everyone has a great evening or day if you're over there.
It's 2 p.m.
It's near my bedtime, so.
Yeah, it's not far off mine, to be fair.
Jeremy, Richard, thank you so much. This was so fun, and I'm so glad you can make it happen.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cheers.
All right, everyone. Have a good night. See you next time.